I don't know the exact moment it started, only that it was ordinary. Too ordinary, which is probably why it stayed with me. I'd stopped by the small cafe 2 blocks from campus, the one with scratched wooden tables and a clock that always ran 5 minutes slow. It wasn't special, but I liked how the windows steamed in the mornings, how you could disappear into the background. She was already there that day, sitting with a book she didn't seem to be reading. My friend's mom, Mrs. Callahan. I'd known her since I was a kid, though mostly from the safe distance of birthday parties and school pickups. She was in her 40s now, hair pinned loosely back, a scarf wrapped around her neck like she hadn't quite decided if she was staying or leaving. I almost walked past, but she looked up before I could. "Coffee again?" she asked, smiling faintly. I laughed, rubbing the back of my neck. "You remember." She closed the book, sliding it aside. "You always order the same thing. Medium, 2 sugars, no cream." Hard to forget. I wanted to say something clever back, but all that came out was, "Guess I'm predictable." Her eyes lingered on me a moment too long. Then she looked away, tracing the rim of her cup with her fingertip. I got my coffee and sat at the next table instead of across from her, which felt safer. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. Exactly. It just felt like it was carrying more than either of us had said out loud. I kept catching myself glancing at her hands. The way she smoothed the napkin flat, then folded it into a smaller square. It was nothing, but it made me restless. "How's Aaron?" I asked finally, meaning her son, my friend. "Busy," she said, almost to herself. "Always busy. You know how he is." I nodded. Aaron and I hadn't spoken much lately. Different classes, different lives. I didn't tell her I'd texted him twice last week and never hit send. She looked at me again, tilting her head like she was trying to read something in my face. "You still writing?" The question caught me off guard. I'd mentioned it years ago, how I used to scribble in notebooks late at night. "Not really," I said. "I mean, sometimes." "Sometimes counts," she murmured, and for a moment her expression softened, like she knew exactly what that meant. We sat in that strange pause, not quite strangers, not quite anything else. The cafe was nearly empty, just the sound of the espresso machine hissing now and then. I wanted to ask her why she was there, alone in the middle of a weekday. I wanted to ask why she noticed what she noticed about me. Instead, I stared at my phone, the screen lighting up with no new messages. I turned it face down. When I finally stood to leave, she looked up again. "Hey," she said, quietly enough that I almost missed it. "Yeah." Her hand lingered on her coffee cup. "This," she gestured vaguely between us, then stopped, almost laughing at herself. "This stays between us." I tried to smile, but it came out crooked. "Sure." She nodded once, like she'd said more than she meant to, and went back to her book. I walked out with my coffee cooling in my hand, feeling like I'd left something unfinished behind me. And I knew, without knowing why, I'd never forget it. I told myself it was coincidence when I saw her again a week later. Same cafe, same table by the window, her scarf draped over the back of the chair. She looked up as if she'd been expecting me. "You again," she said with a half-smile. "Guess I'm predictable," I repeated, though my chest tightened at how easily the words came back. This time, she gestured to the chair across from her. "Sit. Unless you've got somewhere to be." I didn't. Or maybe I did, but it didn't matter anymore. I sat, my coffee warming my hands while she stirred her tea slowly, though I noticed she'd stopped after the second circle, spoon resting inside the cup. "You always study here?" she asked. "Sometimes. Easier than the library." I shrugged. "Feels less quiet." She laughed softly. "I like quiet." Then, almost as if she hadn't meant to, she added, "I don't get much of it at home." I wanted to ask why. About Erin. About her life now that her marriage had ended. Something I'd overheard but never spoken of. Instead I said, "Guess we look for the opposite of what we have." Her eyes flicked to mine, sharp for a second, before softening. She folded her napkin again, smaller this time, like she needed something to do with her hands. "I used to come here when Aaron was little," she said after a pause. "He'd sit with a hot chocolate, draw all over the napkins. It was easier then. She looked past me, as if the memory played against the window glass. And I, without meaning to, imagined it. Her younger, him smaller. Her smile probably different then, less guarded. I shouldn't have thought of her that way, but I did. I shifted in my chair, suddenly restless. He doesn't really come around much anymore, I said quietly. No, she agreed, almost to herself. That's how it goes. Kids grow up, leave the silence behind. She set the folded napkin aside, carefully aligned with the table edge. I thought of the 2 unsent texts still sitting in my phone. Just hey, nothing more. But somehow impossible to send. The conversation slipped into silence after that, but not an empty one. She sipped her tea. I watched the way her hand lingered around the cup, the small pause before setting it down. When I stood to leave, she reached out without thinking, her fingers brushing my sleeve. Barely a touch. Maybe to stop me, maybe just reflex. Take care of yourself, she said. Simple words, ordinary words. But her eyes didn't match their casualness. I nodded, throat tight, and walked out. I don't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. I didn't plan on seeing her again, but patterns form without asking permission. Weeks slipped by, and suddenly her presence was part of mine, like background music you don't notice until it stops. One afternoon, I spotted her outside the cafe, adjusting a grocery bag against her hip. Without thinking, I offered, "Need a hand?" She hesitated before passing me the bag, like the gesture itself meant more than the weight inside it. You always appear at the right time. We walked together toward her street. The day was gray, the kind that makes everything look softer, blurred around the edges. She spoke about errands, mundane, harmless things, but her voice kept dipping, as though she was holding back what she really wanted to say. At her door, she fumbled for the keys, then pushed it open. "Just put it on the counter," she said, stepping aside. I shouldn't have gone in, but I did. The house smelled faintly of cinnamon and something older, like books left too long on a shelf. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels full. She set her scarf down, smoothing it with her hand, as though buying time. "Tea?" she asked. I nodded. She moved around the kitchen, graceful in a way that felt unpracticed, sleeves pushed up, wrist brushing against her hair when she tucked it behind her ear. I leaned against the counter, pretending to look anywhere but at her. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked suddenly. "Miss what?" "Being younger. When things didn't feel so complicated." I almost laughed, but stopped. I don't know. Doesn't really feel simple now either. Our eyes caught in that space where neither of us meant to be honest, but we were. Too honest. The kettle whistled, breaking it. She poured the tea, hands steady, voice quieter now. Maybe it's just me. We carried the cups to the small table near the window. Sat across, the silence stretching longer than it should. I wanted to say something. Anything, but the words stalled. Then the front door clicked. A voice called from the hallway. "Aaron." She stiffened, eyes flashing to mine. A quick inhale. "Stay quiet," she whispered, almost inaudible. I froze, cup halfway to my mouth. His footsteps echoed, then faded, upstairs, door closing. She let out a slow breath, pressing her fingertips to her lips as though steadying herself. Neither of us spoke for a long moment. Finally, she pushed back her chair, but didn't stand. "You should probably go," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. I rose, moving toward the door, but paused when she followed me. Too close. The air shifted. She reached out, almost touching my arm, then stopped short. Her hand hovered, trembling slightly before falling back to her side. Our eyes met. Words hovered on both our tongues, but never made it out. If I'd leaned just a little closer, if she hadn't turned her face away, everything would have changed. It was a late afternoon when we ended up walking together. Neither of us had planned it. I'd just left the library when I saw her outside, sitting on a low stone wall, watching the street like she was waiting for something that never came. "Heading home?" I asked. She nodded, then added, "Not in a hurry." So we walked. The sidewalks were scattered with early leaves, gold, and brittle underfoot. She carried her bag loosely at her side, swinging it slightly, as though the motion kept her steady. We didn't talk much at first, just the sound of shoes against pavement, cars passing in the distance. Then, as we passed a park bench, she stopped. "Sit with me." I did. The bench was cold through my jeans, but the quiet pressed heavier than the weather. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, hands clasped together. "You ever feel like you missed something?" she asked suddenly. I turned toward her. "What do you mean?" "Life," she said, voice steady but low. "Like you blinked and a whole decade slipped through your fingers." I didn't know what to say. I thought about her son, about her house full of silence, about the way she lingered in cafes with books she didn't read. Sometimes, I admitted. "Yeah." Her laugh was small, almost bitter. "You shouldn't. You're still what, 22? 24. I corrected, though it didn't matter. "Still. You have time." She leaned back, eyes fixed on the trees overhead. Her throat moved as if she were swallowing words she wasn't sure she should say. "I thought I'd be somewhere else by now," she murmured. "Someone else." Then, softer, "And yet here I am, talking to you." Her hand brushed against mine on the bench, not intentional, but not pulled away either. The space between us shrank and grew in waves. I wanted to tell her I thought about her more than I should, that every unsent text to her son felt like a cover for the fact that it was her I hoped to see. Instead, I said nothing. She turned her head, studying me in that quiet, piercing way she had. "You make it too easy to forget," she said. I swallowed. "Forget what?" "That I shouldn't be here. With you." The words hung there, raw and naked in the air. She looked away quickly, as if afraid of her own voice. Silence. A car passed, the sound pulling us both back, though neither of us moved. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the bench, knuckles pale. I almost reached for her hand, almost broke whatever fragile wall stood between us. Instead, she whispered, "Tell me, do you ever think about it?" The question lingered in the space between us, unfinished, dangerous, alive. I didn't answer. Not yet. The next week, she wasn't at the cafe. I told myself it was coincidence. People get busy, they run errands, they change their routines. But then a second week passed, and the chair by the window stayed empty. I went anyway, sat with my coffee, glancing at the door each time it opened. The clock on the wall ticked unevenly, louder than usual. I scrolled through my phone, pretending I was waiting for someone else. On the third week, I saw her. Not at the cafe, on the other side of the street, walking quickly, her scarf tucked tight around her neck. She didn't notice me, or maybe she did and chose not to. Something in her step felt different. Urgent. Closed off. I almost called out, but didn't. The following evening, I texted Aaron. Something simple, like, "Hey, you around?" But I never hit send. It felt dishonest, using him as a bridge when what I really wanted was her. Days blurred together. When I finally did see her again, it was by chance. At the grocery store, standing in the aisle with a carton of eggs in her hands. "Hey," I said too softly. She startled slightly, then smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Hi. Been a while." "Yeah," I said. "Thought maybe you moved cafes on me." Her laugh was short, almost rehearsed. "No. Just different things lately." She placed the eggs in her basket, avoiding my eyes. There was something she wasn't saying. I could feel it like a weight between us. We walked toward the checkout together, our steps awkwardly out of sync. I wanted to ask what had changed, why she'd disappeared from the small corner of my life we'd carved out. Instead, I carried her bag to the car in silence. At the trunk, she hesitated. "You don't have to." "I know," I said. But I set the bag down gently anyway. She looked at me then, really looked, and for the first time I saw something I hadn't before. Not longing, not even guilt. Fear, maybe, or regret. "I've been seeing someone," she said finally, so quietly I almost thought I'd misheard. The words landed flat, heavy. "Oh." It was all I managed. She nodded once, almost like an apology. "It's not serious." but the space between us widened instantly. We stood there, half shadows in the parking lot light, both pretending to be fine. She reached for her keys, her hand brushing mine by accident. Neither of us moved. Then she pulled back, climbed into the car, and closed the door. The engine started. I watched her taillights disappear until the lot was empty. That night, I typed out a message. Did I do something? Then stared at the screen until the words blurred. I didn't send it. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence. It was raining the next time I saw her. Not the cinematic kind, just the steady drizzle that soaks into your jacket before you notice. I was walking back from the bus stop when I caught sight of her on the porch, fumbling with her keys. I almost kept going, but she looked up. Our eyes met, and I stopped. You're drenched, she said, pulling the door open wider. Come in for a minute. I hesitated, then stepped inside. The house felt warmer than I remembered, the faint smell of cinnamon still there, mixing with damp air from the open door. She set her keys on the counter and handed me a towel. Thanks. My voice was rough, too soft. We stood there in the kitchen, both unsure of what to do next. The rain tapped steadily against the window, filling the silence. You've been different, I said finally, though the words came out half-swallowed. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed. I thought it would be easier if I pulled back. Easier for who? Her eyes flicked up, sharp, then softened. Both of us. I swallowed. Doesn't feel that way. She laughed once, bitterly. You're too young to understand how much you can ruin without meaning to. Maybe, I said, but I know what it feels like to matter to someone, and I don't want to pretend I don't notice. The words hung there, fragile and raw. She pressed a hand against her mouth, like she wanted to push them back inside. I've made mistakes before, she whispered. Ones I can't fix. Her voice cracked at the edges. I can't risk another one. I stepped closer, not touching, but close enough to feel the heat of her presence. My hand tightened around the towel. Then don't call it a mistake. Her breath caught. She looked at me then, really looked, like she was weighing every version of her life at once. You think it's that simple? She asked. No, I admitted. But I think pretending nothing's here hurts worse. The silence after that wasn't empty. It was charged, trembling. Her hand brushed against mine on the counter. Not deliberate, not accidental. Just there. I didn't move. Neither did she. She let out a shaky breath, eyes closing briefly. Then she whispered, "This stays between us. Always." I nodded, throat tight. Okay. The word was small, but it held more than either of us could say. For a long moment, we stood there, not speaking, not moving, just sharing the weight of what we both knew, finally out in the open. And in that silence, something shifted. Not resolved, not broken, just real. Time didn't rush. It stretched. Weeks turned into a rhythm neither of us announced, but both of us leaned into. I'd still find myself at the cafe some mornings, the clock still 5 minutes slow, my black coffee cooling too quickly. Sometimes she was there first, a scarf draped over the back of the chair like a marker that said this seat's not empty. Sometimes I arrived before her, watching the door the way I used to, only now knowing she'd walk through eventually. The conversations weren't dramatic. She'd ask if I'd eaten. I'd tell her about a class or something half-finished I was writing. She always noticed the small things, if my sleeve was rolled too high, if I stirred my coffee differently. It wasn't perfect. There were days she pulled away, guilt flickering in her eyes. Days I felt the old weight of being her son's friend, of crossing a line I still couldn't name. But then there were the other days, when she'd sit close enough on the bench that our shoulders touched, or when she'd laugh at something I said and rest her hand, briefly, on mine without realizing. The bench became ours. Same one as before, overlooking the street with its brittle leaves and shifting light. We never called it a meeting place, but somehow we both ended up there more often than not. Sometimes silent, sometimes spilling more than we meant to. One evening, months after that first coffee, I walked her home in the early dusk. At her doorstep, she fumbled with the keys like always, then stopped. You still drink your coffee the same way? She asked, teasing faintly. Predictable, I said, smiling. She shook her head, amused, then serious. Not predictable. Steady. Her eyes held mine a little longer than they should have. Not heavy, not desperate, just steady too. We went inside, sat at the kitchen table. She brewed tea for herself, poured black coffee into the mug she kept for me now without asking. We didn't talk much, just sat in the quiet hum of the house. And I realized life wasn't perfect. It wasn't simple, but it was ours now, earned in small moments, in pauses that turned into trust. When I left that night, she followed me to the door. No big words, no declarations, just her hand brushing mine as she whispered, "See you tomorrow?" I nodded. Tomorrow. And I knew she meant it. I don't remember everything about those months. Not every word, not every detail. But I remember the small things, the folded napkin, the steady 8:47 a.m. clock, the taste of black coffee beside her tea. And I remember how, in her eyes, I never felt like a mistake.